First of all, I think the theme informed the structure of the game. So the 3-act structure was informed by that. The establishing the cast, plotting and scheming, and then culminating in the assassination of the king was what that story arc informed the structure of the game. So it definitely did early on as well as later on.
Welcome to Tabletop Talk, where I interview creatives in the tabletop gaming space. I dig into their creative process and inspirations. My passion is understanding who they are and why they create. Enjoy this interview with Jonathan Mordech, the creator of King's Poisoner. We talk about how he took the elegance of Blackjack and molded an RPG of intrigue, court drama, and murder. How he sees gaming as an open platform for children and adults to connect to and understand our world. And how the mechanics informed the theme of King's Poisoner, then the theme informed the mechanics. Okay, please sit back, relax, scheme to kill the king, and enjoy my time with Jonathan.
Hey, this is Jake from GameGearMaster.com. When I'm not making Torino, you'll find me listening to Tabletop Talk.
Before we start this interview, this game is trying to fund by this Friday, May 31st, 2024. I backed it, and I hope you'll consider it as well, because I want to see this game get made. Now to the interview. Howdy friends, Craig here. My guest today is Jonathan Mordech. Jonathan is a game designer, engineering consultant, and entrepreneur. Jonathan founded V2S Games in 2023 with a mission to use games to bring people together. He digitally released several storytelling games and supplements, including The King's Poisoner, which has been shortlisted for the South by Southwest Sydney Game Festival and showcased on PAX Oz, Oz Comic-Con, Conquest, Generation Games, Gen Con Online, and Go Play Northwest Online. Jonathan has run games and workshops at conventions in person and online for people and events worldwide. What an intro. Welcome to the third floor, Jonathan.
Thanks, Craig. It's an honor to be here.
So we were talking kind of before I hit record, and you leaked that you have listened to the podcast before. So that, of course, means you know what's coming. And I want to get your origin story. So at one point, Jonathan, you knew nothing about tabletop gaming, whether it be board games, role-playing games, and it was kind of put in front of you for the first time. Can we go back there?
Absolutely. I was expecting to focus more on the tabletop role-playing games, but you brought up board games and card games, and I'd say I can't disrespect my dad because he was the first person to introduce me to card games. He was an avid player of solo and other like parlor-style card games, and
nice.
His passion for that was infectious, and he taught me some of those, and I guess you can see how some of that rubbed off in some of my designs. So I learned those kind of games at a young age, but I've always been drawn to games of all sorts, tabletop and digital. As far as tabletop role-playing games go, though, that happened much later. I was traveling with some friends, and we met some guys from the UK, and I had no idea what Dungeons and Dragons was, and they asked if we wanted to play, and I was 19, and they seemed kind of cool, and it sounded exciting and interesting. So we all said, yeah, sure, why not? And we were in the middle of nowhere with pencils and paper and dice. And so there was no grids, no minis, nothing like that. And I'm pretty sure the adventure was just made up on the spot. And it was great fun. But what really made it stick with me was the following day, we were hiking on a trail and found a cave, and it was enormous. It was, it had a skylight in the distant ceiling that was with sunlight shining through the roof.
Wow.
Moss covered on the floor, tunnels in the back, and it was just beautiful. But my mind immediately in that moment went back to the stories that we were telling the night before. And that cave took on a new life of mystery and adventure. And that moment stayed with me for a long time. And both reinforcing like the power of the story that we told. I don't even remember the story all that well, but I remember that cave and the way that the story influenced my experience of it. And I realized then the power that these stories and games can have.
So let's go back a little bit here, Jonathan. I want to talk about, you and your dad playing games, and, obviously, your dad's introducing you to, it's time for you, that time that you and your father share together. But as an adult now, looking back at those times, do you have a sense of why you enjoyed the games themselves? Was it just a matter of this was just time with my father, or do you think there was something about the games that really resonated with you?
It was definitely that. The time with my father was special, and we lost my mother about 8 years ago to cancer, and so I really appreciate that now even more. But it was also the games themselves. I've always enjoyed that sense of play and also problem solving, and I think that I've come to realize that the games have a really important role to play in the way that we understand the world around us.
How so?
And I think that this comes back, as I said, I'm a fan of the podcast, Craig, and I've heard about your Rumpelstiltskin story.
Yes.
And I think particularly here in Melbourne, Australia, COVID has had a huge impact on everyone. We had one of the longest lockdown periods in the whole world, 250 days of lockdown. The restrictions fluctuated as the authorities were coming to grips and with the pandemic and the information. But for a large part of it, we were literally confined to our homes. We weren't able to travel more than 5 kilometres. We weren't allowed to go out with more than one person. You weren't allowed to leave the house for only certain reasons. And so it was a really impressional experience for a lot of people. And at the time, I had a 1-year-old and 4-year-old girls. And my wife and I were both working as well, and it was we had to the juggling of those responsibilities was incredibly challenging, and to the point where I had to scale back some of my work and spend more time looking after my children, and which was an incredible experience. Incredibly challenging, but also rewarding.
Yeah. That's time that you'll never lose, right? And you'll never regret now looking back. Sure.
Absolutely. And we played a ton of games. And
that's cool.
And that's how it rekindled my passion and my focus for game. And and seeing them learn and grow and develop and use games to understand the world around them and to explore and learn things and test things. It made me realize how important it was, and not just about the world and about ourselves or themselves, but also being isolated from our communities and from our families and from each other, how important it was to be able to use games to connect with people. And I think tabletop role-playing games in particular have a unique opportunity for that.
I completely agree. when you think about it, Jonathan, during that time, do you have a sense of when that connected for you? Right. So I could see you, having gamed with your father, now introducing games to your children, this concept of it helps them understand the world. That idea, that concept, do you remember what was happening then? So is there a particular game that you were playing that you kind of saw one of your kids like start to connect the dots? Can you go back there?
Yeah. I mean, I think every game has something, a lesson to teach us or learn, whether it's, just in the mechanics or the rules of the game and how they interact. But also like the games in the way that players interact and connect with one another. Something simple, like, Connect 4, and seeing, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with that game, but I think it's like an old Mattel game, which was entirely appropriate for my, 18-month-old.
Sure.
And seeing how her mind was processing the rules and the strategies and the way that how she was learning and getting frustrated and overcoming that frustration and the way that she would interact with her older sister and who was trying to teach her the rules and tell her how to play. And and the dynamic in that situation extended beyond the game, but was also informed by the game. And so it just shows you how, we like to think of games as these closed systems with, a magic circle, but really I question whether or not that we can truly isolate the experience from ourselves personally and from the world around us. And I don't know that we should. I think that there's
right.
I think that there's a lot of benefit to be gained from both letting the world in and letting the game out.
Yeah, I completely agree. So you're 19, you play Dungeons and Dragons, then you see this cave, which just echoes the story back in your head. What's the next pillar for you from a role-playing game standpoint? So when was the next time that you engaged with a hobby?
Yeah, great question. So when I returned from travel, I wanted to play more with my friends, and but I was very short of time. I was studying at university, working a job, doing informal education, flight training. There's a lot going on, and I didn't have a lot of time. I think the version of Dungeons and Dragons that we played in that hike was I think 2nd edition AD&D. I distinctly remember Thaco and being interested curious as to why it was quite fiddly, but that intrigue nonetheless.
Sure.
But I think 3rd edition had come out, and I, of course, went and bought the books and managed to run a game here and there for some of my close friends and my girlfriend and her friends, and but it was one, a handful of games over a couple of years, and I never really had the time to pursue it further. And then a good friend of mine who's a brilliant mathematician, he dragged me to a gaming convention, which I'd never been to before, because he was infatuated with the game Robo Rally. And
oh, nice.
and so I enjoyed the game. He knew that I enjoyed games, and so I was happy to go along. And I played at the convention was called Conquest, which I've since been back to and run my games.
That's cool.
And I got to talking with some of the players at the table, and I mentioned I hadn't played D&D for a while, and I was curious, like, do they run Dungeons and Dragons here at this convention? And they were like, yeah, of course, of course we do. And they were like, have you played? And I said, only a couple of times, but I'd love to play again. And they were like, well, you should come and join our group. And
nice.
I said, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, why not? But they lived, about an hour away from me by car. And so just to show you how enthusiastic I was about recapturing that experience, I drove, I didn't know these people very well at all. And I drove to the other side of town, an hour away just to play. And they were a lovely group of people, and had a lot of fun. And the better part of 10 or 12 years, I would do that once a month or once or twice a month.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So that lasted for a long time. And the commute was there the whole time. That's pretty damn cool.
Yeah.
Now, so you're back in. You're enjoying the game. It left a lasting memory. Now you're, playing for several years. Where do you start realizing that you want to make, right? So at what point did the idea that, I don't want to just play, I don't want to just create things at the table with other players, I want to actually make a game. Can you get a sense of where that started to trickle in?
Well, I think it was straight away, really.
Oh, yeah.
I think like those first few games that I ran for my friends in that interim period, a lot of the rules I invented. There was
and
a lot
why
of
is that? So hold on a second. Wait. Why is that? Right. So and again, it's something that I think is unique, that some people do this and some people don't. So what drove you to say, you know what, I'm going to throw in some of my rules here? Do you remember?
I think that there was certain circumstances that I like that in terms of timing and the player's familiarity and comfortability with the comfort, with the genre or with the medium, and I was trying to tailor the game to suit, so that they would have an experience that I felt they could enjoy and connect with. I mean, we like to think of these generic role-playing games as one size fits all, but really, everyone's different and everyone has their own way of processing information, way of approaching things, way of connecting. And so there often has to be some sort of customization or tailoring to suit, it's like a performance, you have to, it's not necessarily exactly the same every time for every type of audience. You have to tailor it to suit. And so I think that there is certainly a performative aspect in tabletop role playing. I think you have to make sure that you're delivering the experience in the game to suit the people who are there.
I was going to say, and so often with that, Jonathan, is, we think about that being the GM's responsibility, right? That the GM needs to really make sure that everybody's engaged, everybody is taking part in it in the way that they want to, that we're, tailoring it. So I completely understand that. Just a real quick thing. I think I wish more players realize that they have that same responsibility too. And for those of you that are listening, when you're playing, think about that. Think about, how can I help Bill engage more with the game? How can I help Sally engage more with the game? Let's not just leave it to the GMs. So you're then tailor making, reading the room, it sounds like, and making some adjustments to the rules to make sure that the table is taking in this information and getting the experience. When does this start to turn into, I'm not just making adjustments at the table, I'm not just, when does this turn into, I want to start making something whole cloth?
Yeah, that's a good question too. It was further down the track, I think. Like I said, I had a lot of conflicting priorities for my time and a lot of interests. And And so it took me some time to develop the urgency to do that. I think I always wanted to do that, but it didn't come until I started to get frustrated with the experience that I was having with the games that we were playing. And
what was frustrating?
So I think a lot of the common frustrations with some of the early editions with Dungeons and Dragons, I think, which I'm sure are not unfamiliar to a lot of your audience, that the way that combat can sometimes unfold and take a long time, the way that the emphasis on the tactical and strategy of that mini game versus the amount of depth in the role play portion of the game, the way the spotlight management is so much dependent on the skill and attention of the GM. And the responsibility of the GM. And also some of the published adventures that we were playing lacked certain aspects that I've just for me personally that weren't engaging me as much as I had wanted. And so a lot of those, and also like you mentioned, Craig, the lack of facilitation of collaboration at the table that's I think inherent in the system and to some degree. It's not and people, I'm sure people will disagree, and this is just my opinion, but I still don't feel like there's enough support within the game for that sort of collaboration to happen. And because of that, I think that people often find that they're waiting a long time for their turn. They can't express themselves in the way that they want to when it is their turn, and they don't have as much input or creative input in the story or in the narrative or in the creative endeavor that they're participating in. And I think that those frustrations were what I was experiencing, and I could see that there was an opportunity for more. And so I started to tinker, and as I want to do, and speculate and explore, and started to write some things down. And then I came across Fate by
nice.
Evil Hat.
Yeah.
And I started to find other sources of inspiration, and I found Fate, and the idea that you could incentivize storytelling, that it was more that the setting or the adventure could be collaboratively developed at the table. Those sorts of concepts, which I had been hinted at in the experiences that I'd had in the D&D world, were laid bare, and that set me off exploring further. And soon after, I found some variations of those games, and then I stumbled onto a little game called Apocalypse World, and that
nice,
and that just tore the veil away completely for me.
So it sounds to me like, Jonathan, that your desire to tinker, to change things, to make, almost was had less to do with gaming as much as the kind of person you are. Is there other aspects, other hobbies that you have where you find yourself doing that same thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a part of my creative self-expression. Like I've played music from a young age as well, and I've used to compose and write songs, and I love writing stories, as well as poetry, and so it's creating and tinkering and exploring has always been a part of my DNA, but it just manifests in different outlets.
Yeah, and with whatever you're engaging with, right? Which makes a ton of sense. So, guys, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and the methods for crafting their creations. Jonathan and I are going to have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about a little game which is currently crowdfunding while you're listening to this. We've only got a couple days left. We're going to talk about the King's Poisoner. We'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Sam Dunewald, and I'm here to tell you about Dice Exploder, my tabletop RPG design podcast where each week I take a single game mechanic and break it down with a friend. Come listen to me talk to Alex Roberts about love and pity, John Harper about elegance and layout, and Mikey Ham about, what else? Exploding dice! It's Dice Exploder, breaking down RPG design one mechanic at a time. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
So I think, Jonathan, you reached out to me and you said, hey, Craig, got a game. Can you take a peek at it? And I don't know I think you might know this. I'm a sucker. It doesn't take much for me to back something. And the reason I back things like Kickstarters or Backer Kit or whatever is two reasons. One, I want the game, but I also want people to be making games. And the only way people are going to continue to make games is if people are backing those games. But I will tell you that when I read the blurb on it, I'm like, all right, I've got to get him on the show. I've got to check out this game. So I'm going to read the blurb for everybody. The King's Poisoner is a thrilling pick-up and play tabletop role-playing game of court intrigue, romance, and murder. With no prep or games masters required, 3 to 8 players can open the box and create a memorable experience in 1 to 2 hours. Phenomenal. Tells me everything that I need to know. What I want to do, though, is try to go backwards to the day before you started working on the game. I want to get a sense of what was the approach. When did the seeds of this game really become apparent?
I think that the first seeds for this game, and I'm not talking about some of the tinkering and earlier exploration that I did before, but really the groundwork for the King's Poisoner was inspired in some way by Aegon, the second edition. And I was Aegon by John Harper, I'm sure is not unfamiliar to your fans, and is a beautiful game. It really is gorgeous, a work of art in its print form, and the collaborative style at the table is unique and is something that I'm a big advocate of. But it funnily enough, it was fairly oblique or indirect inspiration for this game, because I was developing a game that I haven't published, called I tentatively called Being Earnest, The Alchemy of Reason.
Okay.
Which it involved, I won't go into that game, but basically part of that game was a series of mini games, and one of which was where you had to pay a call on someone and approach them to ask them for something. They had something that you needed, and you needed to talk to them and convince them to give it to you. And I used a variety of card-based games for these different aspects of the game, and the style of that exchange, the power dynamic, and the feel of that interplay between the person trying to get what it was they wanted from the other person, mapped very nicely to the conversation that happens in Blackjack. And that was what inspired the basis for this game, because you know when you're trying to evaluate how to approach someone and to try and connect with them and find out how you can get what you want, but also it's very much like reading the cards that are on the table. You have to put your cards out on the table and say what it is that you want.
Right.
Their cards are closed and concealed. You don't know. You have some inclination, you have some information, but you don't know exactly how they're going to respond. And whatever you choose to do is a bit like pressing your luck,
Right.
And so that felt very much like Blackjack to me. And so when I did it when I wrote this for this game, I thought, well, what other circumstances would that situation be relevant? And court intrigue immediately kind of came to mind. You're trying to conspire and plot and scheme, it mapped very neatly again. And so once I decided to explore that and adapt it to a 3-act structure, the game kind of unfolded in that way. And I tried to keep it as simple and as pure as I could, because one of the things I wanted to do was to make these kinds of games more accessible to people. Like I said, when growing up, I didn't know anything about these games, and learning Dungeons and Dragons is not a small undertaking.
It's not.
And especially these days where, we have, very short attention spans and very limited time, to invest hours in reading hundreds of page books and in establishing the setting for the game or the characters for the game, let alone actually just playing, is a huge barrier.
It definitely is. So it sounds to me like we had a mechanic, and with a bit of a at least a social theme that you have been working on. It reminds me a little bit of like Hill Folk by Robert D. Laws, where you've got two people engaging. One wants something, one has power, one needs power, and that exchange back and forth. You then realize, hey, I think I've got a better theme or a more complete theme when you talk about the court intrigue. What I want to get a sense of, Jonathan, is because that's the mechanics informing the theme. Can you talk to me from a developmental standpoint? Did the theme ever inform the design of the mechanics? So did you ever see you choosing this idea, this theme, then come back around and influence how the game is played?
First of all, I think the theme informed the structure of the game. So the 3-act structure was informed by that. The establishing the cast, plotting and scheming, and then culminating in the assassination of the king was what that story arc, informed the structure of the game. So it definitely did early on as well as later on. Through playtesting as well. Initially, the game was, like I said, I wanted to keep it very simple. And so Act 2 was much more restrictive or more constrained. you could only pick one person at a time to conspire with. And the initial intention was that everyone would be conspiring, but the king wouldn't. And I should point out that it is the king's poisoner, but it is any monarch, any autocratic ruler will do, of any gender, of any of any social structure. I've played over 100 of these games, and it's been everything from kings and queens to consuls and dictators and any CEOs, you name it. But the initial intent was that it would be more restrictive, but through playtesting in one of the games, the king, I think it was at the time, was like, well, can I conspire with this player? I want to, plot and scheme too. And I said, well, sure, let's give it a shot. Why not? So that informed that aspect as well. And also other players wanted to, and very quickly on as well, other players wanted to be involved in some of the scenes of plotting and scheming. So you could then incorporate, rather than just having it one-on-one, you could have multiple people in the scene. And so through playtesting and through the narrative, it informed the mechanics of the game.
Got it. So I'm trying to get a better sense, Jonathan, of the game here. So help me out a little bit. We sit down, we'll say we've got 5 or 6 people. We sit down, we bust the game out open. This feels a little bit like a For the Queen type structure where we learn as we start to play, which is my favorite, especially with these types of games. Let's start off with the roles, right? So give me an idea of what us players would be doing or choosing or becoming.
Well, the first thing you have to do when you sit down to play the King's Poisoner is you have to choose a king.
Okay.
So there's no GM, there's no facilitator, although it helps if someone has played the game before. They're obviously going to take a more active role in facilitating the game, but it's not required. The intention is that you can read through the rules together and play together. So the first thing you have to do is you sit down and choose a king however you want. You can draw cards, you can self-nominate, you can have a vote, whatever you want to do. But once you've chosen a king, the king then chooses at least 2 traits. And there's in the one-page rules that are freely available, you can download now. You can select them off the list, or you can draw a card at random. In the box set, which is being crowdfunded at the moment, there's a deck of cards that you can choose, and each card has 2 options on it, and you can choose 2 or 3 cards and choose options from those cards. So that gives you the personality or something, a prompt for the personality for the king. You have to choose, the king also has to choose an upcoming event that everyone is talking about in the kingdom, and also a threat that is occupying their attention. And that's it. Like you with that is enough for us,
right,
to have a character and a setting and impetus for this kind of story. And while the king's choosing those, or subsequently, the other players choose their role in the king's court. And they too choose from cards. Each card has 2 roles, and they can pick one of those. And they also need a motive for regicide. And that doesn't mean that they are going to kill the king,
right, for
that reason. It just means it's a reason that they have, which they might want to kill.
A reason to conspire, at least, right? Or have the discussion.
Yeah, exactly. And so a role and a motive, and then everyone comes up with a name, and at least some basic, inspirational description for a look. Either It can be something simple like a himbo or something like or it can be more involved and you can go to town with the amount of detail you want.
Yeah.
But that's enough. That takes 5 minutes tops to come up with those characters. And you write them down on your little sheet, or if you've got the cards, you keep the cards there on the table so everyone can see. And then I like to do make sure everyone understands the rules of 21. So I'll do a practice round of 21. And I've played a number of games where people are completely unfamiliar with the rules, but it takes 3 minutes to play around and to understand it, And for those who are listening who may not be familiar with Blackjack or 21, you start with you're dealt 2 cards and you're trying to get as close to 21 as you can. And you're typically playing against the dealer who has 1 card concealed. And when it's your turn, you can choose to either stand, that means you don't want any more cards, or hit, and that means you want additional cards. And if you go over 21, you bust, you lose. And if you're under 21 and you beat the dealer, you win.
So let's put that in game terms then, right? So how does give me a framework where that interaction would happen? Does that happen during a scene?
So each scene is a hand of 21. But there's some mechanical variation, but basically for the first act, the first scene, we start with 1 hand of 21 with all the players involved and the king as the dealer. So, and that first act is called the King Holds Court.
Okay.
And that's the opportunity to introduce our cast of characters, and through that act, and the king deals the cards and describes the scene, the opening scene of the event together. And so and then everyone has a turn. On their turn, they introduce their character, and then they have to either fawn upon the king to stand or commit a faux pas if they want to hit. And there's a list of faux pas, and a faux pas is like a breach of etiquette or a gaffe or a mistake. And so you're pushing your luck if you want to commit these faux pas in court in front of the king. And so each player will commit a faux pas or a number of faux pas or not. And then the king gets to can respond as they like during, but they have to wait until everyone's had their turn before they have their turn. And the dealer has special rules. So the dealer in 21, the dealer has to stand if they're 16 or less. Sorry, my mistake. I've messed that up. In 21, the dealer has to stand if they're 17 or higher, but if they're 16 or less, they have to hit. And so the king plays their cards, and then based on how the hand goes, they can respond and end the scene. So
question for you on that, Jonathan. So I understand when I'm hitting as one of the court members of the court, I'm committing faux pas, I'm pushing my luck, and what's happening with the king though? So when the king is at 16 or less and they're hitting, narratively, what happens?
Well, the king's not confined. They're the king. They can do whatever they like.
Okay.
They can say
sure.
whatever they want. They don't have to adhere to any social constraints.
Got it.
So they can do what they want. But but obviously if they lose, then that's going to inform how everyone else perceives that, because mechanically what happens is if you beat the king in that opening round, you gain an advantage, and that advantage is an advantage token or a checkbox on the sheet if you want, which you can use as it's a chip that you have in the game, in the game of intrigue as well as in the game that you're playing at the table.
So we have this interaction as Act 1.
Mm-hmm.
We then transition into Act 2. So some of us have tokens, some of us don't. The king may or may not have busted. Where do we then go for Act 2?
So Act 2 is plotting and scheming. And this is where like I mentioned to you, Craig, earlier, the Act 1, it typically takes about 15 to 20 minutes. But Act 2 is stretchable. So you can have as many scenes as you want in Act 2, or as the narrative will allow. Which is great, because there are so many times where you want to play a role-playing game, but it takes an inordinate amount of time and you don't have that amount of time, or you realize that someone has to leave soon and it feels like you have to end the game and you don't have a mechanism to be able to tailor that. And so this is one of the advantages of the King's Poisoner, is it's very flexible. You can tailor it to suit your time constraints, which makes it great for like conventions and like game nights or if you're really tight on time. But anyway, so you plotting and scheming. Each player has an opportunity, if time allows, to scheme with the other player, and play a hand against them. So whoever they choose to conspire with, they have to pick at least one. They have to pick one person who's the person that they really want to convince. They can have other people there, and other people can join in, but there's one person that they're primarily interested in, and that person becomes the dealer.
And I would assume that what's informing all of that is my aspects and my motive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I bring to that scene. So give me kind of an idea. Let's say you've picked me, so I'm the quote unquote dealer now. Can you give me an idea of like, what is it you would want from me? What's happening?
Yeah, so we set the scene together and we say, like, so a lot of this is also informed by what transpires in Act 1. Because the faux pas often, implicate other characters, people introduce, because it's a collaborative game, people have the ability to introduce details into the narrative about the setting or about the court, and a lot of those details will inform what your character. They'll both have implications on their role and on their motive.
Right.
And so there's always a good reason to choose one or two or three of the other players, depending on how many people. And I should mention, the game can accommodate up to 8 or even more players.
That's cool.
So I might choose you, Craig, because you might have said something in Act 1 that really sparked my interest or gelled with my motives, that for the reason that I want to conspire with the king, against the king or for the king. You can do either. And so we would set the scene together, and I'd ask you, Craig, how would I find you? Where would I send you a message, or where are you right now? No, that I would come and meet you, and we would set that scene together. And then, because I'm the conspirator, I am the person initiating this conspiracy. I have to make a request or a proposal of you. That's the first thing I have to do. And so we would have a brief exchange, and we could do that in character, or and that's generally encouraged. But some people don't feel comfortable doing that. And so you can do that in the third person, or narrate it as a story. Like the ambassador approaches, the king's son and wants to, with a proposal. And the proposal is that, we will make you king if you'll give us favorable terms on this trade agreement, or or perhaps even threaten them, like, we're going to invade unless you do something about your father. And once you've made that proposal, you then have to offer proof or sincerity each time you want to hit.
Okay.
And so, because you're not going to be convinced just because I say it. Like, you're going to need proof. But perhaps maybe you will. Maybe there's a reason that you are open to this without me having to offer proof. And that's where the cards inform the narrative and vice versa. And so we'll play a hand against each other. And if I win, I gain an advantage. And if you win, you gain an advantage.
Got it. Okay.
But if either of us, and I didn't mention that if you lose in the opening act to the king, you fall under suspicion of the court. And so you become suspected. And if one of the people involved in the conspiracy is suspected, then the king plays as well through their agents. And so our conspiracy can be discovered. And if you lose again after you're suspected, the king can have you arrested.
Okay.
And gets to decide what to do with you. So which is a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
I've had games where the king, we've had a very merciful king, and the king's like, no, naughty, you shouldn't have done that. I'm going to let you off with a warning, or I'll keep an eye on you, but I won't have you arrested. I've had other kings which have been vicious and have once the member of the court has gotten arrested, they've been executed, and and you can still and you're still involved in the game even if you get killed, which is a feature. But also the games aren't 3 or 4 hours long necessarily, so you're not sitting there spending an hour trying to create a new character or waiting to see the outcome without any investment. You still get cards. People can still use your cards, and you're still involved in the game. So,
yeah, that's neat. And, and again, when we talk about the spectrum of the king, right, the monarch here. And again, I would imagine the things like the traits and stuff that they get at the very beginning is going to help dictate where they are. And I like the idea that, that there are prompts and there's some building blocks for us to build from. But then, of course, we have a huge narrative thing. So Act 2 happens. There's tokens flying all over the place. We now move into Act 3. What's going to happen here?
Yeah. And I probably should preface that the tokens have a really strong impact in play. So if it's okay with you, Craig, I could describe what the advantage tokens do is that once you have that token, you can use it to declare an advantage in the fiction that your character would have, but also it gives you license to move cards around the table. So you can...
Oh, that's interesting.
So whenever you play an advantage, you can explain what that advantage is in the story, but also then you can take a card from someone else. You can give someone else a card. You can swap a card with someone else. And you can discard a card if you want. You can spend 2 advantage tokens to exchange hands with someone. So, if someone else has Blackjack and you're sitting there with 2 advantage tokens, you can move things around to suit. But what's really interesting is that because it's a collaborative game, and though, the obvious implication is that the characters want to achieve their goals, the objective of the players is to tell the most interesting story they can. And so it's not always, and it's actually more common that people will use advantages to create interesting fiction rather than to try and secure the narrative control for themselves. And which is how when in the final act, you all play against each other. It's not against the king. The king is still dealer, but whoever has the best hand gets to decide the fate of everyone in that scene, and the fate of the kingdom. And everyone has an opportunity for an epilogue at the end for their character.
Oh, cool.
So it's encouraged. And this is where some of the additional guidance and best practice comes into the King's Poisoner's Survival Guide, which isn't in the 1-page core rules, which explains that what can happen in cases of tie and about the placing some guidance around that so that people have that opportunity to still have a say in the way that their character, at the end of the story for their character, and to engage in that process in a consensual way.
Yeah, that sounds great, and I like the idea. It sounds like it moves along real quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea that we're given some kindling to work with. Really excited to look through these motives and kind of get a feel of what that is. And for those of you listening, we're trying to play this week. The week that this is dropping, we're going to try to organize a game because this coming on the 31st of May is when the crowdfunding stops. And you guys, I'm sure you already have scrolled down. And you see the links in the show notes. We're not sure yet whether we're going to make the game happen, but we're hoping that will. So guys, we're going to take one more break. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk to Jonathan we're going to stop talking to Jonathan about what he makes. I want to start talking about what he eats. Let's find out the stuff that he enjoys. We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, this is Zoe, co-host of the Maniculum podcast, here to tell you about our new Kickstarter project, launching June 1st of this year. The Marginal Worlds Kickstarter is a deck of 50 easy-to-play magic items pulled directly from medieval manuscripts that you can play in any TTRPG. So if you're looking to dazzle your players with magic items once hidden for centuries in ancient tomes, sign up on Kickstarter or themaniculumpodcast.com to check out sample cards, playtest them yourself, and bring the magic to your table on June 1st.
So Jonathan, as you know, someone who listens to the show, this is one of my favorite segments. And what I like to find out is what are things that have gotten creatives excited? So as somebody who makes something, what is something that you've been reading recently, playing, interacting with that really is just like really turned you on?
I have a lot of different influences, both from games and my other professional endeavors and projects and just entertainment. I think from the gaming sphere, I'm really interested in playtesting other people's games as well. And I've been doing that through some of the gaming communities that I've been involved in and met some incredible designers and wonderful people. And that's another reason and a huge reason why I'm involved in this industry. And I'd really love to be able to promote their work and see some of their designs become real and enjoyed by, en masse. And one of the reasons why I made The King's Poisoner to make these kind of games more accessible. So I'm looking forward to doing that and helping them with that. But more specifically, like with the Playtest Zero community and the Open Hearth gaming community, some of the games that playtesting through those communities is really inspiring to be involved in and engenders a lot of creativity. And I get probably the most recent game that I playtested in full, I should say, was by Caro Assertion, the designer behind I'm sorry, did you say Street Magic? Who's designed a game called The Last Train to Bremen. I think that's what it's called.
Okay.
Which is a variation on Liar's Dice, which is a lot of fun.
That's cool.
Yeah, definitely. I'm pretty sure that's the title. I apologize, Caro, if I've made a mistake, but definitely please check out their work. And I'll include a link to Craig so you can put that in the show notes. As far as like pure entertainment, recently I've been enjoying Shogun on Disney Plus, which I read the book a long time ago and really enjoyed it. And I thought I would be disappointed with the adaptation, but I'm not. I'm really enjoying it.
I have yet to hear a bad word spoken about the show. And my father-in-law, my in-laws are here in town right now. And my father-in-law and we bond on Prestige TV. We like finding shows for each other, right? Because I kind of know what he likes. He knows what I like. So my big thing was Tokyo Vice. I was like, Dad, you gotta watch Tokyo Vice, Michael Mann's TV series. And he loved it. And he's like, Craig, I can't believe you haven't watched Shogun. So my wife and I think watched maybe the first 30 minutes of the first episode. And then we just kind of didn't go back to it, but not because we were disappointed or bored. It's just, there's so much freaking stuff out there to watch. But like, I have to go back to it. So why is it working for you? And why is everybody talking about this show?
Well, I don't know why everyone's talking about the show, but I know why I'm talking about it. I think it's just really well made. It's just really well put together, and visually and aesthetically, it's really impactful. The scenes and the landscape are really evocative. The acting is very good. There are some incredible actors involved. The story, which I think which was captured in the novel, is compelling, and it does have that intrigue as well, like, which I think continues to find its appeal, and what drew me to the type of story of the King's Poisoner. I think it certainly resonates with me, and I think that's definitely there. So I'm enjoying the heck out of it. Yeah.
And now you're somebody who's read the book, who's now watching the show. Are you seeing differences? Are there decisions that you can tell the showrunners made that are not in the book?
There are, but I to be honest, I read it so long ago and I didn't reread it before the series.
Sure.
The differences that I've detected aren't significant to me and aren't detracting from the enjoyment. So I'm sure that there are some significant differences, but that will, I'm sure, irritate or upset some people. But fortunately for me, it hasn't been a barrier to my enjoyment.
I've recently become, not recently, I say in the last 5 or 6 years, I've been very fascinated, Jonathan, with adaptations. And fascinated for a couple of reasons. Part of it was my frustration with people not recognizing that different mediums means we have to tell different types of stories. The example I often use is the Watchmen comic book. Unbelievable piece of literature, the original Watchmen by Moore. And then we look at Snyder's movie, which is almost line by line, frame by frame, the comic book. You could sit there with the comic book and flip through and see it happening on the screen. I think it's a terrible movie. As much as I love the comic book, like I can't watch it. I can't watch the comic book. And that's made me realize, like, everybody's like, well, why can't you do it just like the comics? Well, because it's a different medium. And just recently, I read the book Shining Girls, which is kind of this thriller / horror, a little bit of a sci-fi. I can't think of the author's name off the top of my head, but it'll be linked below. She's a South African writer and has become kind of a big deal from my understanding. This is my first book of hers that I read, ripped through it like in a day and a half. And I'm a slow reader. So for me to rip through a book that quick tells you. Well, I found out there's a show on Hulu. And I've started watching that with my wife. And immediately out of the gate, things are changing. But I get it, right? Like I understand, like, yeah, it can't be the same as the book, but I'm very fascinated because you know how I am about the creative process. Like as a showrunner, those are real decisions that you have to make. And I'm always fascinated about why that's being made. So it's cool that you've read the book, but you're finding the show incredibly engaging. I think that's great. Boy, oh boy, let's see. It is Sunday night for me. It is Monday morning for you. And there's a lot of really cool things you can do on a Monday morning, including playing cards with your kids. But you chose to spend it with me, and I appreciate it, Jonathan.
Thanks, Greg.
For those of you listening, guess what? This is the end. You made it. And I appreciate you doing that. Take care. A big thank you to Jonathan for joining me today. You can find out more about their work on v2sgames.com. Do you think games are a powerful tool for connection? I'm dying to hear your thoughts. Let me know on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, or drop me a line at admin@thirdfloorwars.com. And don't worry, all those links are in the show notes waiting for you. Please take a minute to rate, review, and share this podcast. You don't want to miss the next episode. I talk with Jake Carlsmark about their innovative and exciting terrain system. Happy gaming, friends. Remember what George Bernard Shaw once said, you use a glass mirror to see your face. You use works of art to see your soul. Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over. And you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast too while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.